Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it. Good morning. Good to see you. It's good to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as all the other speakers probably said, Dave, wherever you are, Dave Hogg, thank you very much. Dave has this unique trick that I finally picked up on for getting things done, which is he has faith in you. And so you just do your best, because you really want to do your best for Dave. We have so much to share. We're going to bolt the doors, and we're going to be in here for 3 or 4 hours because we're learning so much, and my colleagues are here to help share. So we had to pick something to share, so that's what we're going to do. We were asked to talk about Gemba walks. So we're going to call it kata walks, which is a different kind of Gemba walk. And again, Dave helped us with that name. Another way to look at it, however, is deliberate practice to develop scientific minds. The focus of this presentation, I think, how many saw Dan's keynote yesterday afternoon? Excellent. Dan, somewhere in your presentation you made the comment, you asked the question, you put the question into the audience, how are you taking responsibility for developing scientific capabilities? We'd like to pick up right where Dan left off there, and I'd like to just continue on with that conversation. So what you see on the left-hand side of the diagram here is lean concepts that we've been talking about for a long time, the tools and techniques. There's a lot of talk now about scientific iteration, or PDCA. Of course, excellent stuff. I'd like to talk about what's in the red circle, the process of making it real in your organization, a little bit like Tony already said in the introduction. How do we transform our thinking and acting in an organization? Again, not just individually, but in an organization, and the brain power that was already mentioned. Maybe you should consider this as a report along the way, because we really are continually learning. So don't take this as we have the answer, we know the answer. We'd like to share some things with you about how we're going about that. First thing I'd like to do is to kind of quickly look at some common purposes for Gemba walks. If you hear talk about Gemba walks, you read about Gemba walks, you often find these points. One purpose of a Gemba walk is to see, i.e. to go out and to identify problems and waste. Another purpose of a Gemba walk is to eliminate waste. In other words, a sentence I often find in relation to Gemba walks is to learn why by asking team members and to help resolve issues. And finally, to learn, in other words, go on a Gemba walk as a leader or a manager to better understand our people and organization. Let's take a little bit closer look at those 3 points. What I'd like you to do is just help me out here. Read aloud what you see on the board. Okay, can you read this? So it's absolutely remarkable how our brain fills in the blank, because if we go back, it doesn't say, can you read this, right? But somehow, go to the next slide, please. Our amazing brain fills in the blanks. Let's try it again. Please read what you see here. Okay, and of course, our brain filled in the gaps here as well, right? So the same skill, John will recognize this. I think John Shook showed me this one the first time. So that wonderful skill that we have, our brain fills in these gaps, which makes getting through life better, right? It makes us successful. That same skill can also lead us astray, as we see in this slide. So the point I'd like to make here with this little one is what each of us sees, the impressions we get, is all affected by subconscious biases that we all naturally have. If you want to have some fun, go to Wikipedia and look up cognitive bias, or list of cognitive biases. I believe the list is over 100 long now, and as you go through the list, you'll nod your head and recognize, yep, I've done that, I've done that. Our brain automatically fills in gaps, and here's the trick with that, we don't even realize it's doing that. It's really quick. So we may not understand what's really happening just by looking around and asking questions. And that's why the issues that a team works on should be based on what's learned through experiments, not on someone's impression. Let's look at the next idea about Gemba walks. Purpose of a Gemba walk is to eliminate waste. Here's a problem, and this is something that was kind of sobering to me because I spent a lot of my earlier career looking for waste and so forth. If you ask 5 people what to improve, you're going to get 6 different answers, actually, right? Again, everybody's looking at the world through their particular viewpoint. And I think this is a wonderful illustration done by a colleague of ours in Finland. I like how he wrote, this seems interesting, this seems important. And he says, there's always too much to do, and by random choices you get nowhere. I'd like to say, we're actually really busy. The day is short. We have 8 or 10 hours in the day. If you're working in Detroit, it's a 12-hour day. But of course, the margin in auto parts is so thick because of that, right? Yes. Any auto parts manufacturers here know what I'm talking about. Let's go back, if we could, please. There. The day is short. We've got to make or do whatever it is we do as part of our business. We don't have that much time to improve. Let's make sure we work on the things that are important to work on to achieve the objectives we want to achieve, not walking around looking for random opportunities for improving. So in other words, let's do it more this way. And this is another illustration by our colleague from Finland. The goal of eliminate waste is simply too easy. I don't think that is the goal of lean. I think eliminating waste is something that happens on the way to some other goal. You can look back and say, we achieved that goal, and look how much we eliminated waste as a result. So there's a difference between the things that you say that you see that you can do and the things that you have to do. And the only way to know what you have to do is to first have an objective or a goal. That then becomes sort of the guideline that says, do we need to work on this to achieve that goal, or can we let this one lie? Furthermore, a lot of the things that you'll need to work on, you can't even see right away. They appear along the way. As you work toward your goal, as you iterate toward your goal, a lot of those things to work on don't appear until later. So you can't see them when you're starting out. So eliminating waste, it's a questionable goal in terms of Gemba walks and lean in general. Third aspect of Gemba walks, to learn. Absolutely, I think anyone, any leader or manager who walks through their facilities, who walks through their organization, they're going to learn some things about the state of things. There's no question about that. However, a leader or manager is also a teacher. Anything they say and do, I mean everything they say and do, actually, teaches a way of thinking and acting. I was speaking with a CEO just a few weeks ago, and he said, no, when I go on a Gemba walk, it's not about teaching, it's about me learning. And he didn't really realize that anytime he points at something, anytime he asks about something, suggests things, detects weights, gives compliments, he's actually unwittingly teaching a way of thinking and acting. People pay attention to authority, and it influences their mindset. So while the Gemba walker, one person, is walking through the facility and learning, he or she is meeting many teams and many people, and they're all being influenced by what that person says and does. Teaching may actually be the most significant thing happening on a Gemba walk. So let's sum up the situation so far. A Gemba walker can't know specifically what each team they visit should work on next. You really can't know. Those are things that come out of experiments, not by looking around, right? And anything that leader or manager says when they visit the team will influence that team's mindset and behavior. It does raise the question, what the heck should you do on a Gemba walk? I like this picture, the fellow on the left, right? What you see isn't reality, right? It's going to be biased by your perspectives. Number 2, what you hear when you ask people, what do you think we should do here? What's your biggest problem? What should we work on? Is going to be biased by their cognitive viewpoint. And finally, the third person in the picture, anything you say is going to influence that team. That's the end of our presentation, and we'd like to encourage you to fill out the evaluation forms, and we do have time for questions, lots of time actually. So we do have a solution for you, and we do have some actions for you, and again, it's something we're working with and something we'd encourage you to try as well. A Gemba walk, or a kata walk, if you will, focus on how people are working. Perhaps the most important thing for a leader to focus on during a Gemba walk or a kata walk is not the content of what people are working on. How can we judge that just by swooping in and taking a look? We don't really know where their experiments are leading them right now. But what we can look at is the pattern of thinking and acting that they're utilizing as they pursue goals and try to meet challenges. So, question is, what pattern of thinking and acting should you teach? If we can't focus on what they're working on, what the heck should we teach them? So, number one, this pattern that we teach, this way of thinking and acting that we'd like to teach the teams, it should be system-wide and used in daily work. It's something that's used throughout the organization. And routines of practice suggest that anything you practice should be practiced a little bit every day. Better to practice 15 minutes a day than 1 hour a week, which means it has to be in the line functions. How many people are here in the lean staff? Quick show of hands. Okay, don't worry, moving this into the line staff, the managers need coaches, and I think that's a perfect role for the lean staff. So, number two, this pattern that we teach should be suitable for any goal or problem. This was particularly interesting in the Toyota Kata research in that we don't know what's coming in the future. So if we teach a particular way of thinking and acting, a particular mindset, we have to be sure that it fits what we're going to be doing in the future, even though we don't know what's coming in the future, right? So if we teach Kanban, which we need to know how to use, but if that's what we teach, or if we teach cellular manufacturing or solutions like that, we're creating hammers looking for nails. Those may or may not be the solutions that are appropriate for the problems that we can't even see yet that we're going to be facing tomorrow. So the pattern of thinking and acting that you teach has to be content neutral. It has to be what I like to call a meta habit. We've got one for you. Number three, it should be based on a scientific model. The pattern that you teach, you don't want people operating on impressions because, as we just talked about, our impressions are faulty. So you'd like the pattern of thinking and acting you're teaching to be based on a scientific approach. And finally, we think, and we've added the fourth one, I think the top three are well known for many years. We've added the fourth one, and I think that's coming out of the neuroscience that we're seeing more and more in everyday life, and that is it should include structured practice routines for beginners. This is completely normal in music and sports. In those endeavors, you would never say, you're going to be a pro right away. You begin by playing scales. You begin by practicing a particular routine for throwing or kicking a ball or something like that. And as you progress, you develop proficiency, you can develop your own style. But you start with that basic pattern as a beginner of practice. It's a little bit remarkable to us that that's so common in sports and music and so unusual in business. All right, we have a pattern just like that. We call it the improvement kata and coaching kata. This is a picture of the improvement kata. We're not going to go into this in detail here unless we do want to bolt the doors and spend the 4 hours. It's described in the Toyota Kata book. It's also described on the Toyota Kata website where we put things we're learning. It's just a basic 4-step or 4-phase pattern. You have to understand the direction. What's the overarching goal, challenge, strategic purpose that we're trying to serve here? Number 2, grasp the current condition. This is the one everyone likes to skip over. You have to kind of spend a lot of time digging into figuring out what is currently happening, which sets you up then to establish an appropriate next target condition on the way to that overarching challenge. And then finally, the most fun part, which is step 4, iterate toward the target condition, which is PDCA, right? Learn, experiment toward the target condition. By the way, we started using the word iterate. We noticed that business people in the lean community, PDCA or PDSA, I see Karen Martin is here. I'm slowly converting. Somewhere Deming is smiling. We call it PDCA or PDSA, but if you go into business and say that, the people don't know what you're talking about. So I think in the lean community, by the way, we may need to adjust our lingo a little bit if we want to get lean integrated into the line functions of the organization. So iteration means the same thing. We're going to use a video to show you some kata walks, and they'll illustrate structured practice of the improvement kata and coaching kata. Let me go back one here. It's going to illustrate that bottom point. Structured practice routines. Now, the people in the video aren't such beginners anymore, but they're actually still using a structured practice routine. And the practice routine you're going to see is focused on step 4 of the improvement kata. We're not going to go through the front-end planning portion. We're going to look at the execution portion, which is the iterating or PDCA toward a target condition. What I'd like to do is bring the experts up. Would you guys just come on up? This is George Green. George is the operations manager at Merck for the product Primaxin. He's been there for 6 years and 2 years as a kata practitioner. Morning, George. Yeah. Beth Carrington, my colleague Beth Carrington, is a TK practitioner for 5 years. We're all learning from Beth, let me put it that way. She's a University of Michigan lead instructor, also an LAI instructor. She's a master coach, basically. Morning, Beth.
Morning.
Rhonda Carpenter, also from Merck, was their continuous improvement site development person, and now is transferring into operations, to use her words, so that she can practice what she preaches, i.e., let's get this into the line functions and have managers do this as part of their daily work. Kata in the line. Good morning, Rhonda.
Good morning, Mike.
And finally, my friend and colleague, Bill. Bill is a Kata experimenter and teacher. I guess that's what we do. And he's also a University of Michigan lead instructor and a Lean Enterprise Institute instructor. And we bounce things off each other. Yeah, morning. All right. So what we'd like to do, let me show you a couple things that you're going to see in the videos that are kind of queued up. There are a number of forms we use, maybe a half dozen or so, to help with these structured routines. They're simple pencil and paper forms, all available for free on the website. But we'd like to show you a couple that you're going to see in the video. The top one, marked in red, is the PDCA cycles record, and that's used by the learner. And essentially, let me see how I put this. The learner uses the form to plan and then to review each step, i.e. each experiment. So the left side of the form is the plan for the next experiment. You'll see people preparing that. And then the right side of the form is the evaluation, assessment, or reflection, or the, Karen, study, I believe, correct? Yes, okay. The study of what happened with that experiment, which leads to the next experiment. Each row in the form is one experiment. Beneath that, you'll see the obstacles parking lot. I mean, that's simplicity itself. We started using that about 18 months ago because people have a tendency to want to work on a lot of things. So this form does two things. When people name obstacles that they think are going to be obstacles to the target condition, we have them put them on the form, but we only allow them to work on one obstacle at a time. So that slows people down and says, which one do you want to focus on? Let's experiment against that obstacle. The other thing that it does, which is actually more interesting, when you reach your target condition, you can review the obstacles parking lot and see how many obstacles that you thought were going to be obstacles you didn't end up working on at all, and how many obstacles got added to the form that you couldn't anticipate before. And what it does is it teaches people their threshold of knowledge, that they actually don't know the way to the goal as they set out. You're going to see another form, and that's the 5-question card, which is used by the coach, or in this case, the Kata walker. It is a structured, scientific set of questions that's used to teach a particular mindset. Might be better if they had one of these, wouldn't it? Now, I wish we'd have thought of that. So, you'll find on your table an envelope that looks like this. Why don't you open the envelope, and there are 5 question cards inside, and please distribute one to each person at your table. There should be plenty to go around. Does anyone need a card? Okay. Excellent. So you can use the card to follow along. What we're going to see in the video is the Kata walker is going to visit 3 processes, and he's going to use the same basic pattern over and over again. You can follow with the 5 questions on your card. It's an example from a Merck facility that is Rhonda and George's plant. That's where they're from. So what I'd like to do is stop the video at certain points. After one Kata walk visit is done, we'll stop the video. That is our crack team in the back who has organized this. We'll stop the video, and then we'll get some comments from these people who are all familiar with not only the Improvement Kata and Coaching Kata, but the Merck site as well. Again, I want to reiterate, we're picking up where Dan left off. How are we taking responsibility for changing our mindset, right? I'd like you to pay attention to the audio and the video. The dialogue is important, and perhaps the most important is that you get the pattern. And to do that, we're going to do some repetitions, or some reps, as they say in sports, right? So let's take a look at the first stop on this Kata walk. It begins with a bit of a setup, and then we go into a process. Let's go ahead and roll the video.
Hi, and welcome to Merck Manufacturing, where we make life-saving medicines and vaccines for the world. Today we're going to explore the value stream for Primaxin, a broad-spectrum antibiotic used to treat aggressive bacterial infections. Let's take a look. As we explore this value stream, we'll be using the 5 coaching kata questions.
So Dwayne, as we were saying, how can I help you?
Well, Raul, thanks for asking. It is time for me to walk this value stream again. But before I do, I'd really like to know your thoughts on where you're taking this value stream.
That's a good question. As you know, as a company, we have the strategic goal of increasing production, maintaining the cost, right, without increasing headcount. Now, for the Primaxin stream, we actually are looking forward to increase from 500 to 600 trays per shift without increasing the headcount.
Okay.
Now, you know, Primaxin as a value stream have 4 different loops. You have the pacemaker loop. That includes filling as well as packaging. Then upstream from there, you have the bulk manufacturing. Okay. Before that, you have the supplies inspection. And at the very beginning, you have the receiving process.
Okay.
What areas would you like to see of this value stream?
So I think for this visit and this walk, I'd really like to focus on working my way back in the product testing and take a look at a part of the filling process and looking at the vial loading operation, and then further upstream looking at the supplies inspection loop. That sound reasonable?
Absolutely. Now, before I let you go, do you know what you're looking at?
Explain.
So, let me see. Could you hold this for me for a minute?
Sure.
It's my iPhone, tape.
Oh my gosh.
Here's my badge, lip gloss. I know I have it somewhere.
What you got in
Car
there?
keys, bungee.
Bungee cord.
The 5 questions. This is Primaxin. Here you go.
Okay.
Now, the one thing I want you to do, after you're done with your walk, please come back and let me know how it went.
Deal.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Take care.
Dave.
Dwayne.
Good to see you.
Good afternoon.
Appreciate the
Good to
time.
see you as well.
So as I walk around the site, I'm really focusing in on a lot of the good work that everybody's doing as it relates to the overall challenge
Yes.
that's out there. Can you share for me your perspective on what the challenge is?
Yes, my perspective on the challenge is for us to support the increase in production from 500 trays per shift to 600 trays per shift without adding any additional resources.
Okay, wonderful. So then teach me a little bit about what is your target condition.
Yes, in the chemical lab to support release testing of Primaxin, my current target condition is to develop and implement a 3-roll system using 3 chemists across the level workload.
Okay. And by when do you think you can achieve this?
End of next month.
Okay, great. So make a connection for me
Sure.
as to how this target condition relates back to the challenge that you shared just a second ago.
Yes. How this relates back to the challenge is that we're going to support the increased rate for the Primaxin value stream using these 3 chemists. At the same time, we'll be moving one of the chemists to support another area.
Okay, good. So what is actually happening now?
Currently, we have a 4-roll system. This is also a level workload system where we are working at a velocity of testing 4 batches per day.
Okay. All right, so share with me what you think the obstacles are that are preventing you from achieving your target condition.
Sure. The obstacles that we are working against are differences in how chemists work.
Okay.
Also, chemists work different hours. I have 2 chemists that work 4 10-hour days. I have 1 chemist that works 5 8-hour days.
Okay.
And thirdly, long paperwork process on roll 1.
Okay. So what is the obstacle that you're working on now?
The long paperwork process involving roll number 1.
All right. So let's take a step back.
Sure.
And let's take a look at and reflect on the last step that you took to address this obstacle. What was the step?
the step was to try the three-roll system out.
All right. What did you expect in this experiment?
I expected that we would be able to learn what changes needed to be made to implement this system successfully.
Okay. And then what actually did happen?
We, looking at our data and our graph on the 5 points across the 3 rolls, we realized that roll number 1 is too long versus the other 2 rolls.
Okay. So Dave, then tell me what your next step is going to be.
My next step is to analyze the paperwork process.
Okay. Tell me a little bit more about how you plan to do that.
Sure. I plan on interviewing my chemist and gain a better understanding of how they're working across the standard work for roll 1, and particularly the paperwork process.
And what are you expecting to learn?
I'm expecting to learn the steps, the sequence, and times for the current paperwork process.
Okay. So when can we go and see what you have learned through the execution of this next step?
Tomorrow at the same time.
Okay, great. Dave, I appreciate your time. You and your team are using a great systematic approach. I really appreciate it. Keep going.
Thank you, Dwayne.
So that was the first stop on the catawalk. Something that really interesting that happened when we were editing this video is that I was sitting next to the editor and we worked on this thing for about a week. He said, boy, there are a lot of ums and ahs and little, imperfections in there. He said, I can take those out. And he actually was already reaching for the controls to do so. And I said, oh, please don't do that. That's exactly what we want to see. What we're looking at here is this is at the level of doing and practicing. This is the level where it happens. This is the level that changes behavior. There's no concepts being exchanged here right now. This is the activity, and it's messy. It's a struggle, and that's part of the learning process. So I hope you're picking that up here. I wanted to leave that in here. This isn't, he wanted to put music on it, right? Like a background track. That's how we feed ourselves information a little bit at these kinds of conferences and stuff. Here's a snappy concept with music and, flashy graphics. But this is actually the action that is changing thinking and behavior. What I'd like to do now is just turn it over to our colleagues here who really can comment on what we've seen so far and maybe what we're going to see in further segments of the video better than I can. Any thoughts?
What the thought that I had or wanted to particularly point out, you saw Dwayne, the catawalker, engage with the plant manager and ask him what was the business objective that he needed to achieve in that value stream. And when you see this video and you start putting all the pieces together, it becomes easier to see that the alignment of the challenges each of those areas are trying to achieve, they're actually lined up to a strategic purpose in order to help the area meet their business goals. I would say as a practitioner, what I like so much about it is that it's easy. It's a simple format. It's easy to use. It's easy to understand. And it's also easy to teach. You guys agree?
Mm-hmm. It's a routine, a pattern that can be repeated over and over again.
I'll just chime in. One other point, I think, 2 things I thought were critical is that they're trying to increase their capacity from 500 to 600 trays a day. That's a 20% increase in terms of performance. So the other thing about this challenge and about you actually using this process is that it enables people to strive and reach for levels of performance they never thought they'd be able to achieve, quite honestly. If you had asked them, could we be there, most of the people in that organization would say, you're dreaming. There's just no way to do it. So that's what's also powerful about it. And you'll see as we continue to look forward, the alignment that Rhonda was talking about, look for that in the future segments that are coming up. The only other piece I wanted to comment on was the simplicity of that board, right? There was a storyboard back there with some documents on it, and looked very simple. It, in fact, is very simple. But the key to it is that it's a powerful use of very simple tools, is that you have this PDCA cycle record, this obstacle list. The other thing you notice there is that Dave had a very simple graph in terms of presenting information. So the beauty of it is that the format is simple enough that Dwayne, the kata walker, can see that format wherever he goes. It's a common format to use, and it's easy for the practitioners to use. It's something that can really be deployed widely in the organization. Does not take a whole lot of training, and you can get a tremendous engagement from the organization.
So as we, I
And
just
Beth,
wanted
if you lean forward just a little, I think you'll project better.
I just want to say, so as we begin to the next kata walk that you'll see, watch for the pattern. You'll see the same pattern repeated, the 5 questions, and you'll begin to see people like Dwayne, one of the practitioners, or Rhonda or George, they begin to embed this pattern of the 5 questions beyond even the kata walk. So every time you begin a conversation around change, it becomes a conversation around what are we striving for, right? Putting that up front, first and center, and then analyzing where we are as it relates to that challenge or that what we're striving for. So this way of thinking and acting begins to embed beyond just the kata walks or the coaching kata.
That's right. That's right. We actually get emails from people who say, we've started practicing this at home with tough challenges that our family faces. There are some notable individuals I'm thinking of. Somebody in the audience knows who I'm talking about. Yeah, any other comments you'd like to add? Watch. Yes, of course.
I was going to share that one thing I learned is that I thought I was already coaching with my employees, but when I started practicing Toyota Kata, it gave me a better insight into the thought process that my employee was taking to solve the next challenge, and it really added more meaning, more depth to my interactions.
That's a good point. Yeah, we think we're doing a good job. It's difficult to assess yourself, and then when you look back, you go, gosh, I was such a novice before. And I think as we were talking last night, we were preparing for the talk, you know, a lot of us thought we were coaching, but it really was just sort of an informal interaction. Just getting together to talk is not really coaching. This is coaching. In German, the word coaching is actually training. That's what the word means. It's actually maybe a little bit better definition of the word. It's not coaching, it's training. There are different kinds of coaching. John points that out frequently, and I think you're absolutely right. The type of coaching we're talking about here is really kind of a skill-building coaching or training. Good point. All right. Well, why don't we watch the next stop on the kata walk?
George, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Appreciate your time. Hey, I've got some time on the plant today. I'm really walking around to see how we're doing our business and looking at the overall challenge that's in place for this value stream. Can you share for me?
Sure can. Primaxin Filling is currently operating at about 500 trays per shift output. We want to increase that to 600 trays per shift without incurring any increase in headcount.
Okay, great, very clear. Relate that back to you and your business as to what is your target condition.
Our target condition is essentially an efficient loading method that can be done with a single operator and allow them to load every 15 to 30 seconds.
Okay, great. So then teach me a little bit more about how that relates back to the overall challenge.
What that does is that will allow me to use one of the operators that we currently use in a different core task.
Okay. So then what's actually happening now?
Our actual condition now is we're loading every 50 to 60 minutes, and then we swap an operator out to continue our loading.
Okay. So let's go through what are the obstacles that you think are preventing you from achieving your target condition?
I've got a few. Multiple vendor configuration, impact on washer end feed, and poor ergonomics.
Okay. And which one of these are you working on now?
Multiple vendor configuration.
Okay. All right. So let's take a step back
and
let's look at and reflect on the last step that you took in an attempt to resolve this obstacle.
Okay. Last step was to test a prototype with our Gersheimer and shot trays.
All right. And what did you expect to learn?
We wanted to determine if the trays were the same or if they were different.
All right. And what actually happened?
We found out that shot and Gersheimer trays are actually different.
Ah, okay. And what's the value in that learning?
We have to modify the prototype to work with all tray configurations.
Okay. So with that then, what is your next step?
Next step is to test the prototype with Gersheimer and shot trays.
tell me a little bit more about how you plan to go about doing that.
I'll get the mechanics together. We'll look at putting some spacers in to separate the whole back block from the side of the prototype.
All right. And what do you expect?
I expect that all of the vendor configurations will work as planned.
All right, great. Okay, George, so when can we go and see what you have learned by taking this next step?
We can see it tomorrow at the next coaching cycle.
All right, great. George, I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
It's very apparent that you and your team are following a very scientific and systematic approach and method here.
Thank you.
Keep going.
Okay, great. That's we have one more stop after this. By the way, Raul, the plant manager, whom you saw in the beginning, and Dwayne, our kata walker, were intended to be here, but they got called away on other duties. So we have almost full panel. Just real quick, that George, you're a scientist. In this, no, I mean, I'm not making this up, and I wasn't planning on saying this, but I've seen this video 10 times. But it hit me. You're a scientist. You're working scientifically. You're planning your step. You're making your prediction. And Dwayne in the movie, he's practicing too. He's practicing how to teach that particular method. And of course, he has to know the method, right, before he can teach it. Why don't you guys tell us what you think about this particular segment we just saw?
Okay, I think one of the things, the largest thing, particularly at the production floor level, and something that's not actually shown in the video, is the interaction between our operating staff, our supervisors and managers during the coaching cycle. We've elected to take the kata coaching cycle down to the floor, where the problem is, where we're actually, what we're actually trying to fix, and we've invited the operators to participate in that coaching cycle. That's been very valuable. It's been very inclusive, and people see the things that are happening, what questions are being asked, what obstacles are being formed, and they become a part of that team. And when they become a part of the team, they then own the change, which is exactly the thing that has been the biggest benefit for us making larger leaps on the production floor. The other thing, through experimentation, you understand the system better. Even though you're the learner, you've executed the experiments. Nobody knows more about it than you at that time. Also, when you involve the operators in the execution of those experiments, their level of knowledge increases. And when we do that, we have a personal growth. We have a personal growth through the attainment of each one of those target conditions, and it's through that growth that has allowed us to attain levels of operation that before we only dreamed of achieving. I think that's been very, very important for us. I did want to link back to something that Rhonda said earlier concerning the coaching. Because it is a systematic way, and because the coaching is sort of out front, so everybody can see it, everybody benefits from that, not just the learner, but all of the participants benefit from that. So I think it helps to keep the coach focused through the asking of the 5 questions. And then the runoff from that is when I'm walking the floor and I'm talking to people about other issues that we may not particularly have under kata at the time, the comments that they're making now and the way that they're looking at the problems are directly stem from them watching the coaching cycles, understanding what things we're looking for, and they're starting to get that sequence in their own mind right there on the production floor, and that's exactly what we want.
Yeah, once you get the pattern, it's really hard to not use it anymore. You mentioned the operators, by the way. One of the lessons we learned was, and it's kind of embarrassing looking back, we used to go to operators, let's say in the 20th century, we put them in self-directed teams. I advocated that myself, and we'd ask them, what do you want to improve? You're a self-directed team. We now know that that's not a way to tap the brain power in your organization. What we've discovered, and I think, George, is pretty much what you're talking about, is that when we have a target condition and we're working on a particular obstacle, and then we say to anyone, an operator, whatever, we say, this is the obstacle we're bumping up against right now. We're having difficulties with this obstacle. What can we do here? Wow. So in other words, what we've learned is that the brain power is there. All those concepts have been correct. The brain power is there, but it's latent. You have to manage it a certain way. And when we channel it and give it form, as this example illustrates, and there are other ways to do it, of course, when we channel it and give it form, then it comes alive, and then it's not so much releasing this capability, or it's guiding the capability and developing the capability. And then you get these ideas that are incredible. And actually, George, what you were saying about achieving startling objectives and meeting startlingly high challenges. When we first started, the Toyota Kata book addresses two questions. One is, what the heck is Toyota doing that we've missed in its managerial system? The second question, how can we develop this kind of thinking and acting in our own organizations? When we first started working on the second question, which is all we work on now, we thought, for beginners, you have to make the challenge easy. Turns out the neuroscience runs counter to that and says, well, if they already know they're going to be able to achieve it, when they get there, there's no self-efficacy increase. You, the coach, have to take them by the hand, using a scientific approach, and guide them to a challenge that's got them outside of their comfort zone. And you have to make sure that they're successful by following the method so that when they get to that challenging target condition that really kind of scared them, they go, wow, I didn't think I could do this. And look at what we did. And once you've done that, you've begun to engage those brains. It's amazing what you can achieve. Bill, you've got some comments.
Yeah, I've only got about 30 or 40 things I want to add.
Well, the doors are bolted, so we're good. Yeah.
So a couple of things. One is that when you look at this and you actually see it in the video, it looks staged, right? I mean, Dwayne asks a question and George answers, and Dwayne asks the next question and George answers, right? And it looks staged, but in fact, that's how it happens. Okay, that's an effective coaching dialogue, because the truth of it is both parties know what's on that 5-question card. Okay, and there's an order to it. It isn't just a random conversation. Dwayne isn't going out there just making stuff up and shooting from the hip. He's following the structure that's created in that 5-question card. George knows that that's going to happen, and he's creating. They're waiting for each other. It's like a dance movement, okay? That one waits, one asks the question, one answers the question, waits for the next question. And the reason for that is that something that happened in there, and you'll see it in the next video as well if you look for it, are clarifying questions, which is an important piece of what the coach is doing. It's not just a route, ask the 5 questions in a mechanical fashion. What the coach is doing, or the Kata walker is doing, is asking clarifying questions to make sure that experiment, that next iteration that's going to be done, is really conducted well. So one of the questions was, tell me more about how you're going to do that. Exactly how are you going to collect the data? How are you going to conduct that experiment? Who's going to do it? And those are the clarifying questions that the Kata walker is asking, so that the learner, before they conduct the experiment, it's going to be a value-added one. So it's simple, right, when you begin to look at it, but it's incredibly powerful in terms of the interaction. The other piece that you'll notice in there is that Dwayne was never telling George what to do. He was inviting him. Well, how are you going to do that? Tell me more about exactly what you're going to do. So what he's doing in that role is he's actually stimulating and inviting George's creativity, or the learner's creativity, of how are you going to do that. And that's a big shift in mindset from the way that we typically have been accustomed to manage, which is to sort of direct and guide people to a solution that's in our head, as opposed to reinforcing and building upon creativity that George has and the solutions that he can offer. So I invite you, as you look at this next one, to really keep in mind that, that script that he's following, as well as the clarifying questions, and take a look for how that basically invites creativity from the learner, rather than imposing a solution that's in the mind of the Kata walker.
And how much the Kata walker, or the coach, if you will. Let's go to the next slide. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Brain transfer here. So look at the slide right now. So essentially, if you're going to teach it, if you're going to coach it, you first have to learn how to do it yourself. This is actually a struggle. We find most managers saying, I want to coach. Okay, let's do the improvement kata. No, I want to coach the improvement kata. Well, first you're going to have to do it to the extent that it becomes somewhat of a habit, and that puts you in a position to be able to coach it, because the coach has to make corrective inputs. It's not just asking the 5 questions. He's asking the clarifying questions to ensure that the learner is designing a good experiment, for example. Yep. You really can only do that if you've progressed up this staircase that we're showing on the screen right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just one other point, if I can. Can you go back one slide?
Yes, good.
So on this one, what's happening is if you look at the learner, they have a current condition and they're basically going through a variety of different obstacles through that unclear territory. And each of those obstacles might be different. So in one case, it may be that there's a machine malfunction. In another case, it might be that there's a quality issue. In another case, it might be that there's an operator training issue. And that's what's represented on the jagged line. But the coach is constantly using that same 5-question dialogue. Okay, so anywhere that Dwayne happens to go, and you'll notice he's going to 3 completely different departments, he's using the same routine and the same pattern, which is also reinforcing, it's sending a message to the learner that, in fact, this is a management method. You know, the kata walker, who's probably a senior manager, is not in the facility very often, is reinforcing the practices that are being used on a day-to-day basis. That's a huge message in terms of what Mike was saying earlier, that managers are going to teach regardless of what comes out of their mouths or whatever the behavior is, they're reinforcing. The very last piece, this truly is the last one, is that you'll notice is that one of the questions that are being asked are very much real time. So what's the actual condition now? What obstacles are you working on now? What's your next step now? So the thing is very much focused in today. It's very much focused in what's actually happening. And as a result, what are you learning and what's your next step? It also is an unfolding process. So we're allowing the discovery to guide us through this gray zone. It isn't that George or Dwayne had some preconceived notion of how to get to that target condition. It literally is a discovery that enables them to move forward on a step-by-step, real-time basis. Okay, I'm done, thanks.
That's good, that's good. So what you see in the bottom of the diagram on the screen right now is the meta method being taught, the content-free or solution-free pattern of thinking and acting that once you've got it, you can apply to just about anything. And again, that's so important because we just don't know what's coming in the future. We have to teach something that is really the Swiss Army knife of mindsets that can tackle anything. All right, unless there's something else. Yes, of course. I'm sorry, George.
One other comment. In a lot of organizations, we struggle with how to manage change, and kata has been very important to us for that reason. When you have your coaching cycles out on the floor and you're moving through that kata in an incremental fashion, change is happening. It's happening before everybody's eyes. And so when you get to that target condition, you've actually changed your organization without all of the typical pushback that you get when you roll something out instantaneously. And we can have 3 or 4 kata sessions happening simultaneously, and we're moving through our processes with very little pushback whatsoever. That pushback actually turns into perhaps obstacles that go onto our storyboards. If it's a true obstacle, we work it out. If not, we're able to show how that's not an obstacle, and we're able to get beyond that. But it's a good way to change the organization in an incremental fashion.
Just one last thing. So I think linking together what Bill was talking about in terms of senior leadership having a pattern that is similar to the day-to-day pattern that people like George are practicing in their processes, and pulling this idea of change into the operations is literally about developing a deliberate culture of innovation and change and experimentation. And if you really want to get down to developing a deliberate culture, you have to have a deliberate culture vision on what you're striving for. And now this is a way to achieve that.
Good, that's a good concluding point. So we have one more stop, and then we have some wrap-up slides, and I can get through those pretty quickly. I think we may have to limit the comment at that point, but I think those were really good. Before we go on, can we please thank the panel? All right, let's take a look at the last stop. It's repetitive. It's supposed to be repetitive, okay? Get the pattern if you can. Use your 5-question card. Let's take a look.
Good morning, Alan.
Good morning, Dwayne.
Good to see you again. Really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me this morning. I really would like to just get going and understanding a little bit more about the challenge that you and the rest of the site are working to accomplish.
Well, our challenge in the Primaxin value stream is to increase our production rate by 500 trays per shift to 600 trays per shift, and we need to accomplish this with our existing headcount.
Okay, great. So now let's take it down a level and talk a little bit more about how that relates to you and your team. What is the target condition that you're striving to achieve?
Well, supplies inspection, our piece of the value stream, we need to establish a workflow system in this area that's both planned and leveled.
Okay. And by when are you looking to achieve this?
By the end of the year, which is 4 months from now.
Okay. So teach me and tell me a little bit more about how then this target condition relates back to the challenge that you just shared.
Well, we need additional capacity, and we predict that if we can get our work into a planned and level state, then we'll have the capacity to support the value stream challenge.
Okay, very good. So then what is actually happening now?
Currently, our work is 80% unplanned, and it's not leveled.
Okay.
There are a number of interruptions that occur throughout the day that create this unplanned state, and you can see them in this graph here.
Wow, okay. Very good. All right. So let's move on. So then what obstacles do you think are preventing you from achieving your target condition?
We have 4 obstacles that we've identified. One being that deliveries come in batches. We get a large number of batches of materials at one time. Another being interruptions, and in particular, the supplies inspection personnel being interrupted to go back into the warehouse and direct the movement of materials.
Okay.
A third is the occasional high reject rate of particular materials that come in. And the fourth was that everyone on the supplies inspection team is not cross-trained to do all activities.
Okay, very good. Sounds comprehensive. So which one are you addressing now?
Now we're working on the supplies inspection personnel going into the warehouse to direct the movement of materials, the interruptions that activity causes.
Okay, great. So let's take a step back and let's reflect on the last step that you took in order to address this obstacle.
Mm-hmm.
Let's walk through this. So what was the step that you took?
Well, our step was to try to have the receivers in the warehouse direct material movement.
Okay. And what did you expect?
We expected really just to learn what we needed to work on.
Okay.
And to be able to make that transition.
All right. What actually happened, though?
Well, what happened is that the receivers didn't have the sampling plan and didn't know how to interpret the ANSI tables, so they didn't have the information they needed to direct material movement.
All right. And in the end, what did you learn?
We learned that the receivers need additional information and some instruction.
Okay. So share with me now, if you will, the next step that you plan on taking, your next cycle.
Our next step is to assess the information that the receivers will need to be able to direct material movement.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about how you plan on taking that step.
Well, we currently have a sampling plan that has a lot of information in it, and so we want to go through that and identify which pieces the receivers need for directing material movement.
And who will do that?
I'll probably sit down with that plan and go through and try to determine which pieces of information are needed.
Okay, good. And what do you expect with this step?
Well, we expect to learn what we need to put into a job aid for the receivers.
Okay, great. So then when can we go see what you have learned from taking this next step?
Tomorrow afternoon, we should have identified the information that the receivers need.
Okay, great. Well, Alan, I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with me this morning, and it sounds like you guys are well on your way. I really encourage you and the team to continue following the scientific process that you're taking. Mm-hmm. Well done.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for joining us here at Merck. We hope you find the improvement kata as thought-provoking as we do, and consider making it a part of the way you do work.
That's good. Okay, I just have a couple more minutes. I realize we're a little bit over, and I apologize for that. That's my fault. So the walker is interested in the process people are working on. Did you notice that, right? And he can, as Bill said, he's using that same pattern everywhere he goes. Look, we didn't jazz this up. I'm just going to repeat that. It's funny, I was standing here watching this last one, and I was thinking, maybe I should apologize that it's not exciting enough. And then I stopped myself and said, why should I apologize? This is the real work to do what Dan is asking how we're going to do. Now, yours may look different, and there may be other ways to do it. Let's go through a conclusion. So focusing on how people work, the improvement kata and coaching kata are a repeatable management model, as was already mentioned by the panel. I think we're changing, or we're better defining the role of managers in a lean system. Repeatable management model to produce continuous improvement, adaptation, and innovation, George, just like you talked about. The learner is iterating his way forward, his or her way forward, instead of deciding the way forward. Yes, you can make a plan, but the people in the video realize that any plan is just a prediction, and that's actually that PDCA cycles record that defines their next steps. There's no Pareto chart defining next steps. There's no plan that says this is your next step. They have a plan, they know where they're going, but the steps are defined from the experiments. And that's the action of innovation. I put this next slide in here just briefly because we are taught that innovation is a eureka moment by these famous inventors, and that's not how innovation happens. And I think we're all starting to learn that. Innovation is many small steps across the organization. If you want to be able to reduce your lead time by 50%, that's going to require experiments in almost all aspects of your business. The shipping, the receiving, the packaging, not just the production. That's how these inventors did it. It's kind of stupid that our textbooks just show the inventor standing next to their invention when that's not at all how that invention came to be. Let's go back. Here we go. Finally, you're equipping people with a pattern and mindset that's not solution-oriented but discovery-oriented. By teaching the improvement kata and coaching kata patterns, you build an organization that can successfully deal with challenges, and in particular, interesting to me, an organization that's better able, that has more self-efficacy for dealing with uncertainty. To maybe, if we do a good job coaching, to maybe even enjoy the uncertainty that's all around us all the time anyway, which is actually kind of an interesting part of life. There's an Ono quote in today's schedule, I believe. I recently found this Ono quote. I'm just going to read it, okay? It's so good. It was just published in a Japanese newspaper in, I think, July, August. This is Ono, you talk about setting numerical targets and using them to determine whether something is acceptable or unacceptable. That should sound familiar, by the way. But that's not really what management is all about. That's what you'd call monitoring. True management is about organizing things so that everyone works toward their targets. This guy's talking to us. He's gone. He's talking to us. And we came up with this word called target condition. And when I saw this quote, I thought, wow, maybe we're at least on the path that's being suggested. You can get more information. Write this URL down, if you will. It's ISD. I had to find a way to give you this presentation. It's online, including the video. You can watch it if you want. I just had to stick it somewhere. Our URLs at the university are kind of complicated. I apologize. Just write down isd.engin.umich.edu/AME, and you can watch this. The presentation is there. You can watch the video as much as you want. Okay, number two, I want to tell you about the Toyota Kata website. There's nothing for sale there. I don't mention it because we're selling something. The Toyota Kata book stays the same. We keep learning more. This is where we put it. There's a handbook on there that you can download, which shows you things we learned. And finally, if you would like, you can pick up your own wallet-size plastic 5-question card from Diane and Gina at the University of Michigan booth in the exhibitor hall. I encourage you to do that. And finally, I don't know, it sounds kind of silly. It is my privilege to be here and to see all of you year to year. We're learning from you. The things you're seeing here are actually coming from you because we're experimenting in organizations like yours. And it is my privilege to work with people like this and to share with you some of the things we're learning. And next time we get together, we'll have more.